Hi, everyone. I am Kelly, and this is Two Broads Talking Politics Live. I am on today with Sari Beth Rosenberg, who is an educator, and we're going to talk some about teaching and COVID and education and how things might be better now that Betsy DeVos won't be Secretary of Education anymore. So welcome, Sari.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor and pleasure to be here today, or tonight, I guess. I guess it's already evening.
Yeah, it gets dark so early nowadays.
It could be 10 o'clock. I don't know.
Yeah. So let's start with just some about your personal experiences in teaching. So you teach high school, right?
Yeah, so I teach high school. This is my 19th year, so I'm rounding close to 2 decades of teaching. And I've been teaching at the same high school. It's a public New York City public high school called the High School for Environmental Studies. So I've been there this whole time. And I teach US history, AP US history, but in a public school setting, I've taught many different subjects through the years, but lately it's been US history. And a lot of teachers have been saying this, that my 19th year feels like my first year this year.
So have you been remote teaching since March?
I have been. We did a little in person in the beginning of the school year, but it wasn't in person. So basically we had hybrid model at our school, but all the teachers were teaching remotely. And then there would be kids in your room engaging in their own remote lessons. So there was no direct in-person teaching, just remote, even if we were there.
Yeah. So
right.
So I'm sure that's great in terms of not getting COVID, and it's fantastic that you're able to stay home. But what sort of challenges does that lead to in trying to figure out how to get the lessons that you've been teaching for so long and suddenly do them in a whole new way?
It has been so challenging. It's been taking the entire school community, including getting students more involved in asking them basic questions about, like, did this work today? It takes a lot of vulnerability on everyone's part. Teachers have always been kind of trained to be the experts in the room and don't let them see you smile until December, right? That was the old adage. But I found that the way it's working best for teachers and school staff who are kind of throwing away that old playbook and focusing more on the social, emotional learning needs of the students, and also making them partners in figuring out how to do this and being honest with them and saying, this is how I taught it every other year, but this year, let's try something different. Does this work? Does this not work? And it's challenging because we've been trained to not kind of be like that,
Have you been able to build the same kind of relationships with students that you would in the classroom?
No, I'm going to be honest, bluntly honest. I've been trying to do as much as I can to do that. I mean, last year was different because I knew the kids in person. And then when March came, we all had our inside classroom jokes. I mean, my favorite part I love teaching US history. I'm a big history nerd, but I also really love the relationships you build with the kids, having those conversations spill out into the hallway, or just like telling a kid you like their nails. I mean, that's how you build I'm into that, but that's how you build relationships with students, like getting to know them, getting to know their interests. And it's really hard when it's virtual. So I haven't used that as an excuse to not try. And I keep, it's trial and error. I feel like I'm trying my best to create a community. I try to make class playlists. I try to, joke around with them some days, not, push things so fast. Like, we got to get through the content because, yeah, sure, there's content to be taught, but if we don't have a community, or at least try to have one, what's the point? But yeah, it's completely impossible. But there's a vaccine coming, and I'm hoping that we just appreciate those communities so much more when we get them back.
Yeah. And have your students or students you've heard about in other places been facing other kinds of challenges? So, things with technology, things with their own parents being sick, or, what sorts of things have kids been facing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm in New York City. So March and April, I was spending there were no boundaries in terms of just like me being accessible to my students. I had students messaging me on email about parents being on ventilators. I had students telling me that their dad was sick in the room next door and they have to just stay in their bedroom. So it's, all just working through that in March and April. A lot of kids are working second job, a job now that they couldn't have been doing if it wasn't remote for them. So kids are, our country is facing not just a global pandemic, we're facing this economic crisis that existed, we were always on the kind of fence of teetering towards that because of the way our country has been run for the past 4 years. And so students are really affected by this, not just the global health aspect, but also just helping it make ends meet with their families.
So I want to zoom out. You just mentioned the way the country's been run for the past 4 years and how we have, in fact, been sort of teetering on the edge of a lot of catastrophe that kind of suddenly came out. So the Secretary of Education in the country for the past 4 years has been Betsy DeVos. And I thought before, I'm in higher education, so education sort of means something different to me. But I think I sort of thought of K-12 education as being a state issue, a local issue. It didn't have that much to do with the federal government. There wasn't that much the federal government could do to mess it up. And then the past 4 years came, and it seemed like maybe there was a little bit more than I had realized. So what has education been like in this country under Betsy DeVos? What are the things that sort of came out that sort of fell apart in a way that maybe we wouldn't have expected?
Well, the good news, and this is kind of a funny way to put it though, but the good news wasn't as successful at pushing her school choice agenda as I thought she was going to be. I mean, everyone in public education, we were all just kind of holding onto our seats, bracing ourselves. And she wasn't able to get through all the things I thought she was going to get through, but like in terms of like, she's trying to break down the public school system. So like with the CARES Act, she took some of it was like $180 million. She used that money to fund school choice projects and private education. And obviously the stuff with Title IX in terms of like allowing someone who's been your alleged rapist to cross-examine you. I mean, her assault on transgender rights in schools. I mean, that alone is terrible in terms of like defunding she was able to defund public education, and Title I in particularly, and I work at a Title I school, got hit badly. I mean, I think most people probably listening are tuned into this, but since 2008, Title I schools haven't really been able to build back. And having someone like Betsy DeVos in there and that entire administration, they were not focused on helping public education, helping Title I schools that were already struggling. So that's why I'm so excited that Biden won, because he believes in public education, right? I mean, he believes in refunding it, and even stuff like in terms of the infrastructure of schools. I think I forget the agency, but it's the American Society of Engineers gave the infrastructure of public schools a D+. And that's directly tied to why so many schools aren't safe to open during a global pandemic when the disease is airborne, right? So just taking that money away hurt it. It's just that she didn't hurt it as much as I thought she was, but I was being, I think, cynical for a reason.
So what was it like teaching about American history? So during that time, that 4 years, but then also during an election that was so fraught. And, obviously you had a very clear mindset in your personal life about who you wanted to win. What does all that look like teaching that?
Oh, I mean, my heart goes out more to the AP government teachers because they're really getting into the weeds with it already. And everything they teach has been turned around in terms of like, wait, that's not how the textbook said it's supposed to work. But, I teach US history and government. And so, I've taught through the Bush administration, Obama, now Trump, now soon Biden. And I will say that it was a point of pride to not let the kids know who I voted for, who I supported. I mean, if they were smart enough, they could figure out that I wasn't some big conservative. But I felt like I wanted to have as little bias as the person discussing the content. Like, let the primary sources, the secondary and tertiary sources speak for themselves, and then let kids come to their own conclusions and help them along the way. Like, if a student felt like they had more of a conservative point of view, I would give them the, sources to look at to help them unpack that. Trump administration has been completely different. The rude awakening was, the kids were it was pretty clear. I run the Feminist Club at my school. It would be pretty shocking to think that maybe I was also voting for Trump, but sorry to upset anyone who thinks they're a feminist who's a Trump supporter.
But they're not watching this anyway.
I'm not sorry, to be honest. So it was kind of obvious, but I will say that some of the, and one thing that I love about what Biden and Cardona are looking to do is to diversify who teaches. I teach at a school where I'm usually the only white person in the room, and I'm the teacher. And that's how it is throughout this country. I'd say, unfortunately, because I think representation matters. And so what some of the other white teachers realized, who are being a little more circumspect in how they were talking about politics, students started assuming that their white teachers who weren't very clear about who they voted for, or like very obviously upset on the day after election day, they just assumed that they voted for Trump. Mm-hmm. And that made them feel very unsafe in the classroom. So I don't regret that my students knew from the start who I supported, because I see myself as their ally, and I can say things that they can't because they're DACA and in a protected position. So I'm okay with that. I'm also really happy to go back to less of a obvious political stance moving into this new administration, because I just like teaching American history and letting the information speak for itself.
So what are some of the things that you are anticipating that the Biden administration will do in education? Joe Biden, of course, is famously married to an educator himself, Dr. Jill Biden, and talks a lot about education and how important education is. But, from the platform, from the things they've said, what are things that you do expect to happen?
So first of all, I really believe in their platform, and that's why I was an early supporter of Biden and really getting behind it, because of his platform, what he was putting forth in terms of he wants for education. I do believe that, he's talking about increasing wages and health benefits for teachers. I think that's abundantly important. I know that, like, let's back up. He's promising the first 100 days to open up schools. I am nervous about that. I'm not going to lie. I think it's safe in certain places, but I think knowing that certain infrastructures need to be improved. But I do think that he's going to allocate funds to do that in a safe way. I believe in him. I also know that I know some of the epidemiologists and doctors with whom he's speaking have his ear. So I don't think he's going to open schools unsafely. I think we can really expect that. I will feel safe to go back into the classroom if the Biden administration says that it is. And I'm someone who's been pretty vocal about how certain school environments are not safe because it's an airborne illness. So the fact that I'm saying that says a lot, I think. There's other people out there who are more important than me, but I think that I've been pretty honest about how I felt there. So I do believe that when he says it's safe, I think it will be safe. I also really love that he's putting school infrastructure in his plan. I like that he has defeating the NRA in there, because before we were worried about school safety in terms of an airborne disease, we were worried about bullets. Mm-hmm. So I like that that's in his plan. I really hope that happens in the first 100 days. I know that that's a difficult beast to work with. Improving teacher diversity. Another thing that I really like in his plan is that he wants to increase funding for teacher training. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to put something out there that isn't in the plan per se, but when I started out teaching, there was something called a Teaching American History grant. And I loved them. And I know this doesn't just apply to history teaching. What that did was it coupled the university level education professors, and it was basically a federally funded program that put together cultural institutions, elementary, K through 12 teachers, professors, And it was about helping the teachers stay in touch with the content, the new historiography in my case, but if it was science or math, whatever the latest thing they're teaching in college. And it allowed for teachers to be, reinvigorated about what they're teaching, and also let them know what kids are going to be expected to know and learn and understand when they get to the college level. And I think what would be really awesome is that if part of Biden's plan for teacher education, they start thinking about ways to connect K through 12 teachers, not just with college level educators, but also people in the field, the career fields, right? So, and that, because I really think that what I've learned and a lot of teachers have learned in this whole process, and parents and students, is that we really, and this has been a buzzword, but I really mean this, we need to reimagine what is school. I know it sounds really basic, but what is school? What are we doing here? Because the focus for so long has been on getting them to do well in those assessments. What happens when the assessments are online? So like, how do you even know if they're not cheating or not? And so I think that, and also like, I think that we really need to start thinking about what we're preparing our kids for. And so having that program where you have the people in the fields, career fields that students are looking to enter one day, also college, working together so that teachers can go into the classroom with just a renewed sense of purpose, and also kind of knowing what to expect, helping kids know what to expect once they leave the safety, so to speak, of the classroom.
Yeah. All right. Well, Miguel Cardona, if you're listening,
Let's talk.
Go find Sari.
Yeah,
talk about this program.
Yeah, I'm available. We can talk.
Nice. I like it. I think it's important that, for as terrible as trying to navigate school and everything with the pandemic is, you're right, taking this as a moment to sort of figure out what are the lessons we're learning? What are we really trying to teach our kids? I've thought about that a lot with my own kids being at home, and certainly there are things they're not getting that they would have gotten in the classroom. That's the way it is. But I'm hopeful that there are other things that they're getting that they wouldn't have gotten, that there's a balance there, and that we can keep some of those ideas going forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I mentioned Miguel Cardona. He's the nominee for Secretary of Education in the Biden administration. What do we know about him, and what kind of Secretary of Education he might be?
Well, from the start, what I loved too was that Biden was promising someone with a public education background, and even better, someone who'd been in the classroom. And, it is hard to find someone who's been in the classroom for that long, because a lot of times they, to get into a position to be qualified to be Secretary of Education, you need to have, well, maybe not this time, but usually have some sort of, management or executive experience beyond the classroom. And what I love about Cardona is that he was a fourth grade teacher, and I think he was the youngest principal in Connecticut ever. You can fact check me on that. I think I'm right. He was 28 when he became principal. So that at least means that he was in the classroom for a couple of years, and you don't forget what that's like. And I think the biggest problem is when you have someone who's the Secretary of Education who doesn't remember. You never forget your first time. You never forget your first job, and I don't think you can forget what it's like standing there in a classroom. And so that to me gives me so much hope, because I want the person making decisions about what school staff, teachers are dealing with every day. I want them to at least have that as a touchstone, that they were there once amidst the sea of desks and students. And we know that diversity is something really important to him. Diversifying who's teaching kids, and also getting rid of that horrendous education gap that we have in this country, which has always been there. And I feel like a lot of people just who've been lucky enough not to witness it are seeing it right in their faces now because of the global pandemic. But that's something that Cardona has been fighting to close from the beginning. So I'm really happy that he's in that position and hopeful.
Yeah, it seems like such a big job. I mean, it's not the biggest of the federal agencies, but it's a lot of employees. I think there's like 4,000 people working for the Department of Education or something like that. What are you hoping in terms of the people who are going to come into those positions beyond the career people who are in there? Who else would you like to see? Not names of individual people, but what kinds of backgrounds do you hope that the people have that are working in that agency?
I want as many people who've been in a classroom. I think it's so important. I think that we've lost touch with that. And I also want people who are not into just coming up with programs, but thinking about how to implement it. I think that there's been a lot of good intentions throughout the decades in education and what the federal government has set forth, but we haven't thought as much about implementing it. And that's where I think that, and I know they've always had teams of teachers to consult with. I think that I want to see people in positions who want to give teachers, and I'm going to even say something crazier, students a seat at the table. Because I'm learning a lot about involving my students in what we decide to do, saying to them, like, do you like this app that we're using to do this project? And if they're like, nah, miss, we don't like it, they call me miss. I say to myself, all right, then why am I doing it? Because if you want to think of it in terms of like, a different model, like if they're the audience and the audience isn't enjoying it, then why are we doing this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I really hope that we have as many people. I mean, of course, that I'm not trying to say that if you've never been in a classroom, there's no way you know how to run a school or how education works. I'm not going to say that, 100%, but as many people who have been in a classroom, have experience with that, and also people who are open to bringing teachers, students, and parents, give them a seat at the table, get their input, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are going to be in these schools and recipients of this type of education plan.
So speaking of students, you mentioned your feminist club at your school. Tell me a little bit. I know a little bit about the feminist club, but tell our audience a little bit about the feminist club and how that came about and what you do.
Yeah, so the feminist club, we're called the Feminist Eagles, and this was founded in 2015. And I know, giving a little bit of way back in the day in 2015, calling it the Feminist Club was a political action at the time. It was a bit of a risk because it would be a year later that everyone called themselves a feminist, and it wasn't considered like a dirty word or something that people balked at. It became just part of the cultural milieu, if you will. At the time, the kids weren't sure if we should even call it that. And it really is a social justice club. I mean, they've always been committed to being about intersectional feminism. And I will say that one of the ways that I've really been able to maintain community and connection with my students this year has been through this club. I mean, little did we know that in 2015, a club that we started would take on this life of meeting on Google Meet. But a lot of them, the majority of the members I've never met before, they're freshmen. And it's amazing because a lot of these kids don't have much connection with the school at all. But every Friday we meet at 4 p.m. We used to meet like on Wednesdays or Thursdays after school. We decided to meet on Fridays at like 4 p.m. And it often goes on for more than an hour because these kids are just like thirsting for connection with each other. And it's a really powerful group. And I honestly, I was already a feminist to begin with, but I learned so much about, I would call it fourth wave feminism at this point. I was often just listening and kind of taking in where these young people, what now we call them Gen Z, had to say about feminism. And I feel like that has made me realize the importance of just intergenerational activism. And another big push that I'm in 2021, another big push of mine is intergenerational activism. I'm Gen X, they're Gen Z. I think it's a nice pairing. And I think that I want us to all to stop saying, well, we messed up, kids. It's up to you to fix it. And I think it's more like we could have done more, but we're here to mentor you and also learn from you. And what can we do to amplify what you want to see in the future? And I don't want to just rest it on their shoulders and say, have a good life, like fixing what we messed up. I think we really need a partnership there. So that's what the Feminist Club has taught me as well.
I love that as another Gen Z person.
Yeah.
I'm Gen X. My kids are, I'm not even sure. I think my oldest is Gen Z and my youngest is maybe even whatever is after Gen Z.
Like Gen PPD to be determined.
Gen Alpha, I don't know. Anyway, I'm all for that partnership. I think that's so important. I agree. It's, it's not fair to us to be like, yeah, sorry, we messed up.
Good luck with that.
But they are, when I spoke to your group, it gives me so much hope. They're just so fantastic. And what they're going to be capable of is amazing.
Yeah. And I wanted to I don't know if I could say that on this. Thank you so much for being a guest. And the other big thing that I do, and then it's also informed my teaching, kind of just taking off the training wheels a bit, like, let them lead the discussions. I from the start have always made it be like, I introduce the guest and then they do the Q&A, and they're so good at that. And then I realized, well, why am I not doing that in my class as well? And I think that teachers are learning in this time that our students are capable of a lot more than maybe we realized, because it's just all virtual and we're just kind of creating this new learning environment. And so, putting them in charge and empowering them, it's just such a good life skill too.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to make sure we talk about today?
I mean, I think I've got my points across about like intergenerational activism, and also like, again, message to the Biden administration. Like, I'm so thankful that you put someone who believes in public education, is a product of public education, and wants to better support public education. And I guess my other big message is, hey, everyone, I know that you're feeling kind of down on public education and teacher unions and all that stuff, but like, it's a global pandemic, and I really believe that we can get back. I think we don't need to be as hysterical as we have been. It has been terrible, but I do believe that we have the tools to come back, build back better, as Biden says, and just reimagine school and make our public education system better, or maybe better than it ever was, because it wasn't always great for everyone, right? Everyone says that public education is the great equalizer. And I got this from Leslie Redmond. She was saying that, people call education the great equalizer, but it could also be the great divider. And I think we've kind of romanticized what school has been, and it hasn't really been the great equalizer ever. I mean, we had school segregation for decades. So let's start, in a way, let's build back better. Let's kind of start from scratch and find ways so that everyone can benefit from the system, and make it so that, like, you're not, that whole idea of like the school choice is like, I want my kid to go to a better school. Well, let's back up a little. Why can't we make all schools great? So I'm really hoping that from Biden and Cardona and everyone who's a part of the public school system.
Yes, here. I love that. And I hope that, it seemed like in April, everyone was like, school teachers are amazing. We don't give them enough, and then it just sort of petered out. And I hope we get back to that and remember that, no, this is, I could not do this job. And I'm so grateful.
I think there has been a lot of, because that's what's been happening with Trump, has been really good at dividing us. And he even made school, he made masks political, he made school political. And I do feel myself feeling like I'm getting very defensive about school, and it should be open, and there's parents getting mad at teachers. And it's just, I just want us to all get along. And I think that we can. I think that it's like we're all just fighting for the same thing, which is that, like, we all have a good education system. And I'm just hoping that in the new year, we enter it with a renewed push for community and unity, and realizing that we have a lot in common. And let's push for that.
All right. I love that. Perfect way to end. And thank you, Sari.
Thank you.
I will put on our website with this episode links to your social media so people can find more. And thank you. This was great.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great conversation.